please give us a few minutes while we wait for others to join in? All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual tour of the Timken Museum. We're so excited to have you with us this morning. A few housekeeping things before we get started. Please keep yourselves muted throughout today's presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Zoom chat function by clicking the button at the bottom of your screen that says chat in order to type your question when prompted by our speaker, and we'd be happy to address any questions or comments. If you're joining us over on Facebook Live, welcome to you as well. You can always ask any questions you may have using the comment section on Facebook, and we'll be monitoring those comments and answering those questions as well. Lastly, this tour is being recorded and streamed live and will be posted to our social media channels once the tour is over. If you would like to rewatch this tour or watch other tours put on by the Timken Museum previously, please check out our Facebook page to find those. It is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker this morning, Dr. Florence Gillman. Dr. Gillman has been a docent at the Timken Museum since 2022, and she has been a member of the USD faculty since 1986. At USD, Dr. Gillman has served as chair of the Department of Theology and Religious Studies, coordinator of the program in Interdisciplinary Humanities, and coordinator of the program in Classics. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'll turn things over to you, Dr. Gillman.
Okay, thank you, Renata. Good morning, everybody. At least it's morning here. Good morning, wherever you are. And I'm looking forward to talking with you about Zurbaran's painting, about Zurbaran himself, and some things about his history. I would like to take questions here and there. So I know that Renata will keep you muted until I mention that we'll take a few questions. So if you do have questions, jot them down, and here and there, I will ask for them, or you can, as she said, put them into chat. Okay, the subject for today is specifically Zurbaran's Portrayals of St. Francis. And I put a slight subtitle there, Unlike the Man in the Bird Bath, because if you ask people about St. Francis, very likely you would receive, oh, I know St. Francis, of course, he loved the animals, and I have a statue of him in my garden, and he's very recognizable, as he is in this statue in the lower left here, which is in the big Forest Hills Cemetery in Jamaica Plain, New York. That is a very benign, joyful, kind St. Francis. And indeed, that's who Francis was. But that isn't all who Francis was. That is more like the popular emphasis on him, you could say. And Zurbaran gives us a whole different dimension of Francis, which is also Francis, and that's what we want to look at today. So the occasion for studying Zurbaran for me is that the Timken Museum has a Zurbaran, what you see right here on the screen, and it's entitled St. Francis in Meditation. And you notice that he painted this in 1635. So he is known to have painted some 32 or maybe 34 portrait type paintings of St. Francis. Can't really call them portraits because, of course, Francis lived in the 13th century and Zurbaran's work is in the 17th. So I would like to talk a little bit about the paintings of Francis, and I would also today like to do something about the historical background of Zurbaran's own time and why his paintings of Francis are like they are. Why didn't he paint the Francis that we see near the bird bath? Why did he paint this very, very sober, dark, and yet illuminated figure who you will notice as we go forward in almost every painting is holding a skull? So I would also like to dare to speculate or ask you to speculate where you think the paintings of Zurbaran, the paintings of Francis of Zurbaran, which were commissioned by Spanish conventos, so Spanish monasteries. I would like to ask you to kind of theorize, where do you think they placed these? They're not altarpieces, and they're relatively large. If you see the dimensions on the screen right now, you see that this one is a little more than 3 feet in length and 2 feet in width, more than 2 feet in width. So it's a rather large painting. And what I like about it in its present location in the Timken is that it is at the level of the person who walks up to it. So you can walk up to it and look into the painting as if you were encountering Francis. And that's pretty interesting because someone is already speculating, by the way, on the chat that it's placed in a monastery. Yeah, that's exactly it. These were Zurbaran's paintings of Francis were commissioned for monasteries. The question is, where in the monastery did they put them? And so that's what we might speculate about. So they're definitely not altarpieces. So where else in the monasteries might they be? Well, as we go on, we can come back to this, see what you think as we go on, and then we could talk about that. Okay, so this is the Timken's possession, and going forward here, which I'm having trouble doing right now. Okay, just next door to the Timken in San Diego Museum of Art is another Zurbaran. So we in San Diego are really lucky to be able to see close up, literally, 2 Zurbaran paintings of St. Francis. Now this one has a little more action in it in the sense that there's a window type, or actually probably a cave opening type scene behind Francis. And again, we see the skull, but this time we see a book balanced on the skull. The Museum of Art's version of Francis shows a little more of his habit, and with the distinctive rope belt of 3 knots, signifying the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. But again, you see a very, very sober, reflective, pensive, meditative Francis, probably reflecting also the period of his life in which wearing such a heavy robe with a cowl over his head and so on reflects both the coldness, but also the sense of withdrawal from much of regular life action. Notice this one is later in Zurbaran's life, so some 30-some years later than the previous one. As we go through these paintings, you will notice tremendous contrast between dark and light. So this is, of course, the important technique of chiaroscuro, which is one of the distinctive characteristics of Zurbaran, which he probably learned at least somewhat from Caravaggio. I'll talk about that in a minute. He is absolutely expert at chiaroscuro. So it is not easy to create white. And this is what he's very, very talented at doing. So I put these two paintings together to just compare so far what we've said. Notice that the painting on the left, the Timkens, reflects very closely the fabric of what Francis wore. So according to the sources, he wore very rough burlap kind of clothing. And here you see Zurbaran's expertise in painting fabric. He was very famous for being able to do that extremely well. You notice that the hood of Francis in the first painting looks different from the second. It probably is different from the second. The hood on the left with the pointed hood is called a capuchin hood. And if you've been to the San Diego Zoo, you may have noticed that there's capuchin monkeys who have a pointed hair on the top of their skull, referring to the same kind of a hood. Okay, let's go. Zurbaran himself, here are the dates of his life. So you see that he's basically a 17th century person. And he's also basically a 17th century Baroque artist. This may be, according to art historians, a self-portrait of himself. He painted it, however, in the context of a painting of St. Luke. I'll show you that in a minute. But art historians are rather sure that this is a painting of himself. So he would have painted this in about 1635 to 40. So he's around 40 years old at the time he paints this. As you can see on the left, he was born in Extremadura, Spain, and his father was a Basque. So at 16 years old, he was already an apprentice to the famous painter Pedro Diaz de Villanueva. And he then set up his own studio in Seville in 1629. Zurbaran is most heavily throughout his life connected with Seville. He had a very large family. He had 3 wives. The first 2 of his wives each died. So there was a great deal of sadness because in both cases it appeared he was happily married, numerous children, and then he lost both of those wives. He married a 3rd time and had more children, and one of his children succeeded him as a painter, Juan de Zurbarán. Because Zurbaran was a very successful painter, his family lived a relatively stable, normal life. This is where he puts himself into the painting of, that is his version of what it would have been like for St. Luke to paint Christ on the cross. Now, there's legendary stuff in Christianity that he has no historical basis, but it somehow survived in some circles that Luke was a painter. There's even a legend that Luke painted the Virgin Mary and the child Jesus. Well, anyway, picking up on that legend, Zurbaran puts Luke into a painting of Jesus on the cross, which is now in the Prado, and which gives us some insight into what he looked like himself. Let's survey his career a little bit rather quickly. In Seville, the Dominican monastery of San Pablo el Real asked him at one point to paint 21 paintings, and they wanted them in 8 months. And they wanted them of various saints. So as you can see, 14 were of St. Dominic, and the others included St. Bonaventure, Thomas Aquinas, and various doctors of the church. So this monastery was it was very large. It was very concerned to present these important figures in Christianity to the monks in the monastery. So this is probably a clue too to where any of the Zurbaran St. Francis paintings were hung and were used and hung. These paintings functioned to inspire the monks, and of course to inspire them to emulate these great figures. That commission especially solidified Zurbaran, his reputation as an established painter, and he received a great deal of business from other religious conventos, both male and female. So in 1629, the officials of Seville asked him to say, will you guarantee that you will stay here permanently? And that would add to the fame, literally the bragging rights of the city, which he agreed to. He did stay, but at the same time, the King Philip IV of Spain appointed him as his official painter also. Excuse me. So all in all, Zurbaran is a very successful painter in his period. And he is much impacted by the spirituality of the time. And the important thing to remember here now is that this is a period of following the Reformation in the 16th century. So in the 17th century, there is, on the Catholic side of things, a deep, thoroughgoing, angst-filled, yet ambitious reaction to the Reformation. So one of the things that it was very clear, okay, that the church which had been so challenged by the Reformation, indeed had needed to reform and needed to continue to reform many of the things the reformers had complained about. So Zurbaran was very influenced by a movement called Spanish Quietism. It really fit his personality, but it seemed to also shape it. So this movement taught an inner withdrawal. It was a very reflective, pensive form of spirituality, leading a person to humbly submit in silence to the presence of God in order to discover God. And you had to practice various penitential exercises to control your senses, to calm your intellect in order to focus your mind and your heart on being open to the experience of God. So that profoundly affected his art. He resonated with Francis in that sense. It enabled him, because that had been very much similar to Francis's approach on many levels of his life. And that enabled Zurbaran then to paint Francis very reflectively. So this period is also, of course, the emergence of the Baroque style. The Baroque is a response to the Reformation. And Baroque refers to the style of art, certainly the architecture, the literature and music in Europe, which is part of the Counter-Reformation. It responds to the needs and the tastes of the Counter-Reformation church. Now you notice that with this slide, I'm using the first time the word Tridentine church. So part of the response of the Catholic Church to the Reformation, as I already said, was to continue the needed reforms. And that was eventually discussed and made more concrete by what was called the Council of Trent. The adjective for Trent is Tridentine. So this is the Tridentine period. And later in this lecture, I'm going to tell you more about that, because that is quite an interesting phenomenon of a council that, believe it or not, influenced that side of Christianity, the Catholic side of Christianity, until the middle 20th century. So Baroque style did have its divisions, so it differed whether you were in Italy, Spain, Portugal, even in just in Sicily. And the term was originally disparaging. Prior to the Baroque as mannerism, in which it had begun to wane in the 1580s, but some artists were reacting against mannerism, which was rather flamboyant, and they were trying to revive naturalism at the same time as Baroque is developing. The famous people that we might mention doing that are the Carracci brothers and the artists Celio and Caravaggio. So these people, with their painting, began the transition to Baroque, and that became very dominant by 1600. Caravaggio seems to have been a major influence on Zurbaran. It's not clear if they ever met, but it seems almost certain that Zurbaran had seen some of Caravaggio's work. Caravaggio was a brilliant master of chiaroscuro, so he employed also a lot of naturalism, and he used models in order to achieve this, and severe lighting effects, so severe light and darkness, chiaroscuro, but also tenebrism. You probably know this painting of Caravaggio. This is one of the most famous paintings of St. Paul, of the conversion of St. Paul, of which there are many, many paintings. Probably Zurbaran had seen this, and this must have, challenged him in a great way to be as skillful at the art of chiaroscuro as Caravaggio was. While we aren't sure if he ever met Caravaggio, because of his similar use of light and darkness, he's been called a Caravaggisti. And as such a person, he was really expert, as I already said, of painting cloth and also white draperies, and therefore also monastic habits, as we see in the habits, the clothing. The word habit is the religious term for what a monk wears. So in the habits he placed on in the portraits or in the paintings of St. Francis. There's another Spanish Baroque painter named Coton, who may have also influenced Zurbaran. And yeah, this style led Zurbaran's subjects to be very realistic, and also very severe, you might say, in their asceticism. So yeah, a last view of the incredible chiaroscuro of Caravaggio, and now back to Zurbaran. So this painting he did, this is another one of the St. Francis then, he did in 1632. So this is very contemporaneous with the one at the Timken. Please notice that it is in Buenos Aires. That will relate possibly to something I'll say later on about Zurbaran. Again, notice that the painting is with the Capuchina, or the capuchin type of hood. Notice the quality of the cloth, how well he's able to demonstrate that. Notice the skull in his hands, the memento mori, it's called, the reminder of death. Notice that the habit, as he has painted the cloth, is very rough. There is actually a habit, so actually the robe of Francis, one of the robes that he wore in Assisi, in a museum regarding St. Francis. And it is, of course, very worn. It is very much like what we would call burlap. Okay, this one at the National Gallery in London, 1635 to 39. By the way, I've put these in relative chronological order. This one you see reflects patches. So if you look right over here at the sleeve also, you see that he wants to express that this is rough. This is material that is in tough shape, and that's very true about Francis. What Francis wore was old stuff and stuff that was wearing out and stuff that was full of holes. And of course, that contrasts, if you know the story of Francis, that contrasts with his very early life, where as the son of a wealthy merchant, he wore very, very beautiful material, very beautiful clothes that he specifically, in his conversion, rejected. Okay, this one is next chronologically of the ones I'm showing today. This one's not too far from us, so in Pasadena. And here you see also, again, a patched robe, cappuccino, capuchin hood. And also you see the artist wants you to see that it is frayed and wearing, falling apart. Again, memento mori over here. So this one is actually titled St. Francis in Meditation. And this one in Lyon, this one reflects more light shining upon the habit. We don't see so much the patches. I do not know, I haven't found the answer yet, why he's got 4 knots in his rope. But if you notice, even today, if you see some Franciscans, you'll notice that they still wear the same rope and normally have 3 knots in their rope belt. Okay, now I pointed out that in every picture Francis had a skull. So this is the famous idea that I'm sure you know, called the memento mori, so the reminder of death. And you might wonder but you might wonder, how did he get a skull that he would have with him as he prayed, presumably in his room, on his prayer, on his kneeler bench, on his table if he had one? Well, one place people got skulls and one place where skulls were kept were called charnel houses. And there are still a few charnel houses. A charnel house is a building or a vault where human remains are stored. So a lot of cemeteries were too small, or it was too hard to keep digging new graves. And so there were places for centuries and centuries and centuries where the remains of people who had died and whose flesh had disappeared. All that was left were bones, and those remains, those bones, were exhumed and put in a pile in what is called a charnel house. So you can get into charnel houses here and there. So they're usually near churches, often monasteries, and often often accessible to the people who live around there who want to go in and look at them. As you might imagine, in monasteries, these became a place to meditate, on how fleeting life is, and to experience reality, the reality of the finitude of being a human being. We also see this in some Native American groups. Some of the most famous charnel houses are the one that was found on Fleet Street in London, next to St. Bride's Church, down under a section of it. That one is easy. If you're in London, that one is easy to get into. But one of the most famous ones to me is the one at St. Catherine's in the Sinai Peninsula. So, as you know, the Latin memento mori means remember, you have to die. Gosh, here we are again in the church year where Ash Wednesday is coming up. And at least in those Christian groups that celebrate Ash Wednesday, the wording of the Ash Wednesday reminder as someone puts ashes on your forehead is remember that you are dust and unto dust you shall return. Well, it's the same thing. It's a memento mori. Usually it's a skull, as we see in Zurbaran's Portrayals, but in art is an is an attribute. It can also be a coffin. It can be an hourglass that is definitely not full, so half empty, 3/4 empty, reminding the viewer, you don't have much time left. Or it can also be some wilted flowers as a sign of how fleeting life is. This idea of reminding ourselves that we have to die isn't particularly Christian. It goes back, way back. I mean, you have philosophers like Plato, you have all kinds of Roman writers. In Judaism, it's very clear. Christianity is well known for such reminders. So it's a human reminder. It contrasts, with ideas such as eat, drink, and be merry, which, it does say tomorrow we die, but it's more emphasizing what you do now. Have a good time because you're going to die. The memento mori actually is more so on the tomorrow we die side. It's like, get ready. And it especially, I think, means on the moral level, on the spiritual level. What in your life do you need to take care of? What are the reconciliations you need to achieve? What are the things you need to indicate you're sorry for? Where can you repair the damage you've done in life? Hurry up because tomorrow we die. What do you think? Is this a healthy approach to reality, or is it unhealthy morbidity? I think I'm halfway through the slides, and with that question, maybe we'll take we'll let everybody off on mute so that we can have some conversation here about anything I said so far. Or you can pick up on this question about memento mori. I guess I needed to show you one more slide though, which is St. Catherine's. This is the what's called the charnel house at St. Catherine's in the Sinai. And look at this place. So this is the monastery. So it's in here. It's over here on the right. Okay, now I've seen other slides of this, so I just happen to know that these are only the skulls. These are not the bones. And, to lighten the moment, I might say, well, this is a way to meet everybody who's historically been in the community at once. But actually, it's a very serious kind of picture. And here in the container in front of it is actually a whole monk who's dead and withered, of course. And it probably seems very morbid to us, but I don't know. What do you think? Shall we shall we unmute and have some discussion here? I'd love to hear from some of you and um, find out what you're thinking.
Jane has raised her hand.
Great.
Hi, Florence. This is fabulous as always. Um, Two things. One, as I've talked to people about the Timken's St. Francis, somebody pointed out to me that when his capuchin hood is up like that, pointed up, that it indicates that he's in prayer. Is that something that you've heard, or
No, it could be though. I don't know everything about Capuchin monks, even in, even current time, much less historically. That could be, it could be used as a signal.
yeah.
Like stay away from me. I don't want to talk right now.
I also, his face is enclosed in it, so
Yes.
that it's not like he's out there ready to engage in conversation. He's in his own space.
Yes, and that's on purpose. It's not just for warmth or something, but it is to cut off communication because
Yeah.
so much of a monk's life is mandated to be in silence. And so therefore people in monasteries do things to help themselves. So if you have this hood and you can't really see to the right and left, well, that helps you from not talking to the person to your right or left. Yeah, so there are things that people in monasteries do to help themselves maintain a silence that enables them to focus on God.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Yes.
Yeah, I have one other question or
Oh,
comment.
great. Good.
When you talked about the Counter-Reformation and the way the church wanted to bring people back from the Reformed Church, our painting of the prodigal son, someone has suggested, I mean, it's considered Baroque. And once you brought this up, I remember that when you look at the hands if you can remember the hands of the father and the son holding the tenderness, was there was a suggestion that was showing that the church is ready to welcome back
Yes.
people who had gone to the other side, to the Reformed Church. Is that something that
that's true. Oh, that's true. That's a standard understanding of many of the paintings of the prodigal son that post-date the turmoil of the 16th century. Yes, and when I move now into some history of the Council of Trent, one of the purposes of the council was to bring as many of the protesters, the Protestants, back as possible, and to bend over backwards to see what could be done to meet the legitimate those demands that seem legitimate for reform. So they really intended the council to be reconciliatory, although it didn't turn out in the end to achieve that much. Okay, does anyone else have a question at this point? Okay, don't forget you can put questions in the chat. Okay. Okay.
I received one from Facebook.
Okay.
Scott, and it is asking, wasn't it sacrilegious to separate body parts as it was believed people would be raised whole? Holding/keeping a human skull would prevent that?
Oh, that's a great question. It does seem it does seem to make a difference, but in fact, from the very beginning of Christianity and even in Judaism, based on my knowledge, I can't talk beyond Christianity and Judaism. I'm not sure what happened with Buddhism and so on, but even in Judaism, the bones of the ancestors were exhumed, if you were wealthy enough, and put in what we would call an ossuary, a bone box, And we have thousands of these boxes in Israel that have been excavated. And that's where you get the phrase of being gathered to your ancestors. To be gathered to your ancestors was for your bones to be exhumed and you were put in this box, but not the skulls. So even then, because if you filled the box with skulls, the box would be about 1.5 feet long, maybe 2 feet long, about a foot high, about a foot wide. Well, that would be 3 skulls maybe, or 4 skulls. And the idea of these boxes was to keep a whole bunch of the ancestors together. So even then, skulls were separated. And so Christianity, emerging from Judaism, doesn't seem to have any problem with skulls being separated. And Christianity then, moves into the Middle Ages with a great deal of interest in relics. And while I don't think modern Christians have the same intense interest in relics. You can tell me if you know some people who do, but it became, especially in the Middle Ages, it became really important for your church to have a relic. And that meant, pilgrims would come to your church and, let's be honest, that was good for the economics of your town, right? And so they were happy to separate bodies. If your church got a skull and the other church got a long bone of your arm, well, that was okay. So people did not see that in relation to the question you asked, which is a very interesting question, that, how could the resurrection occur? But on the other hand, the obvious answer to that is, if God can raise the dead, God can reassemble the body, right? So I'm sure that's the kind of answer that they would have had is God's not going to have any problem. Yeah, so thank you for that intriguing question. Maria, I think you were going to ask a question. Yes?
Yes.
Hi, thank you very much. It was very interesting, Florence. And I have a question. Do you see any signs of evolution of his Zurbaran style? Because it's so many images, they look very similar, but I'm sure should be some differences.
Well, it would take a more sophisticated analysis by art historians to answer that question. So I wouldn't want to make a stab at that. And I have not researched that particular question. I couldn't really answer that. All of the paintings that I will show you today, we still have more to look at, are very much similar genre. I mean, he really doesn't change much. And that's why eventually he will go out of style. And I'll show you that in a minute, what happens. Yes. Okay, Renata, if we can go back to we have one more question on chat. Okay, I guess I got it.
It was the one. Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, Maria, if we can, or Renata, if we can go back to mute, yes. We can continue on here. Okay. So I wanted to tell you about the historical context, because this is really interesting. And I really enjoyed the discovery of some new art that I had not seen about the Council of Trent. So Council of Trent basically is that period of Catholic revival following the Reformation, mid-16th to mid-17th century. So the mid-1550s, let's say, into the 1660s. So Zurbaran's right in the middle of it. And the council begins in 1545, and it extends to 1563 with 3 different sessions. So they don't stay in Trent that whole time. They are there off and on, and sometimes there are more bishops there than other times. So how should we envision this? Well, Trent is the modern Italian city of Trento in northeastern Italy in the Dolomites. I don't know yet. I'd like to know why they had it there, because it did not seem to be an easily accessible place for an awful lot of people, an awful lot of bishops from around the Christian world who had to travel there for the council. Now, oh, I forgot to also put in here, before I go to Trent, that slide was out of place. I forgot to put in here the section of Zurbaran's decline in popularity in this century. So from 1640 forward, his austere style that we've been talking about was challenged by the famous Spanish painter Murillo. And Zurbaran's reputation declined. As you already noticed, his paintings of St. Francis are so similar. So he didn't achieve the same shift in style that Murillo's work reflects, which is much more sentimental. He had to go to Madrid to see if he could increase some of his contracts. And then he even went near the coast, where I'm not sure which city of the Spanish coast, but because he encountered a lot of ships heading for South America, especially Lima and Buenos Aires, he started painting pictures for the South American market. And interestingly, many of these paintings were done on consignment. So he and his studio would paint a whole bunch of paintings and then either sell them to the captain of a ship or consign them to an officer of the ship. And then they would receive payment for these paintings when the crew returned. So therefore, he sent a lot of paintings to South America. That's the last part of his life after his reputation had declined. You'll note that he died in Madrid on August 27, 1664. I wanted to show you this comparison to end up the section on his life with one of his paintings of Christ on the cross on the left, and a painting by Murillo that we have at the Timken also on the right. So it is Murillo on the right who is eclipsing now Zurbaran on the left. And I think in the comparison of these two versions of Jesus on the cross, I think you can see what happened. So basically, maybe one of you would like to theorize this. Renata, can you unmute everybody and let's see who wants to take a stab at why Murillo eclipses Zurbaran? Renata, can you?
Sounds good. Yeah.
Okay, who wants to take a stab? Come on.
I
Who's
will.
out there?
I will.
Good.
It's Jane. The Murillo is much more dramatic. It has all that dark stuff floating around in the background, and the lighting is much more contrasty in a different way. It's not so much to emphasize the body, but to make the whole thing hit you right in the face in the way that the Zurbaran is more realistic.
I think you're right. The Zurbaran is definitely more realistic. The body is already dead.
Mhm.
The body has been, because of the dark and light, you feel like it's been bruised and so on. On the right, you see that Jesus is still alive, and he's looking as if he's looking up at the Father and saying, what, what am I supposed to think? Have you abandoned me? After all, he does, according to the scripture, pray, Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? And you see that possibly in this moment on the cross, but he's also an unbruised, for the most part, body, unbruised. He's also, there's more feeling, more sentimentality.
There's also
So
context. There's also, I mean, now in your slide, finally, I can see Jerusalem. I mean, when you look at the painting in the Timken, and I tell people that there's Jerusalem in the background, it's almost impossible to see it in the lighting there.
yeah.
But
Yeah,
here,
I was lucky to get a pretty high resolution
yeah,
copy here. Yes. Okay. Let's see. Okay, let's go back to Elliot. Are you gonna join in here?
I have a quick comment. I view the painting on the left as very pessimistic. That it's Jesus, in effect, is worried. What's happened? Is it going to succeed? Is it going to fail? Is it going to get destroyed? But the painting on the right just booms out with optimism. No, it's okay. It's on track and it's going to work well.
Okay, so you can even read more. You can even read more into the painting on the right as what I think. Yeah, thank you. Do you know, those of you who are not docents, do you know that when we take children through the museum, especially little children, we get quite a range of reaction to the painting on the right. And it's the questions range from, what's that man doing there? Why is that man like that? Who is that man? So and sometimes the painting has also been experienced as upsetting. So it's kind of interesting because as docents, we don't always know how children are going to react, and we have to kind of tiptoe into this painting to see what they already know, and so on. Okay, I will continue on because I'm running out of time, but I do want to tell you the rest of this historical background about the Council of Trent. And I'm having trouble advancing here. Let's see. Okay, so I already said a lot of what's on here. This period, of course, is after the Renaissance and after the Reformation. And the Reformation had resulted in a relatively north-south split in Europe, but with various areas made exceptions. But generally, the North was Protestant and the South was very Catholic. There are two branches of Protestantism that dominated, the Lutheran and the Calvinistic, so the Lutheran and the Reformed. And they had various reactions against the art of the pre-Reformation church. And those were important points because there have been some iconoclasm that accused the Catholics in various places of actually worshiping the artistic images, actually worshiping statues and so on. And that had led to a lot of destruction of religious objects and definitely left a spirit of having little to no art in the churches of the Reform, in the Protestant churches. So Calvinism was especially hostile to religious art and wanted no crosses, no sculpture, no large paintings. It was okay in books. And so we have, for example, interesting woodblock paintings in books on the side of the Reform. Lutherans were a little more open to some art. They especially preferred scenes of the Last Supper. Interestingly, the Catholic side especially preferred crucifixion scenes. We could speculate about that, but that would take us too far outside our subject for today. I did want to show you another Timken painting, though, that's quite relevant to what we're talking about, and that is this Dutch church, the Nieuwe Kerk. as of 1657. So Emmanuel de Witte painted this, and this was a church that had been built in the 14th century. It had become Calvinist, and you can see based on, it had been rebuilt, it burned and was rebuilt in Gothic style. So it burned in 1645. He then paints it in 1657 as it was supposed to be at that point. And you see there is very, very, very little art, if any, as you look forward. I've checked this over and over. This is looking forward to the main, what had been called the main altar, which, and you see, as true to the reform, okay, the emphasis, of course, big in the picture is the pulpit. So the preaching and the emphasis on the biblical aspect of Christianity is very, very strong in the Reformed churches. And yeah, you'd be hard pressed to find art in this Calvinistic church. Okay, so the reform, on the side of the reform, the reason to reject art was this fear of idolatry. And that led, as we've looked at in other subjects, that led to a huge decrease in the amount of religious art. If we were talking about Rembrandt, it would be very interesting to point out how Rembrandt's work changed very quickly, and how he painted different subjects in the period of the Counter-Reform. So artists had to diversify. They moved into historical subjects, they moved into landscapes, they did portraits, they did still lifes, and so on. But artists like Zurbaran responded by actually painting a stricter style of Catholic art. So this is one explanation for why the paintings of St. Francis are so serious. Okay, he is not the man in the bird bath, as we started out saying. He's a very serious Francis who is a challenge to reform where reform is needed. Okay, the council itself had 3 sessions. Here you can see the dates. So mid-40s, early 50s, and then early 60s. And it's in the last one that the council mandates what Catholic art should be like. The earlier sessions affirmed Catholic doctrine. What is the actual doctrine as distinct from Protestant positions? Reforms were instituted. So all kinds of things were set up to ensure that the reform of the church continued, but also that the church would not lapse into some of the things that had happened in the past that had indeed needed reform. For example, in the past, a bishop did not have to live in the place where he was the bishop. All he had to do, he could just collect money from that diocese and so on. The council mandated bishops had to live where they were the bishop. And that's only one minor point, that the council mandated many, many, many reforms. It was indeed a serious attempt to continue the reform that the church had known it needed since easily the 13th century. People had demanding reform all those centuries. So it was a very sincere council in that sense. You see on my notes that at the beginning, there was real hope that some reconciliation, at least with some Protestants, could be achieved, but that by the 3rd session, by the 1560s, it was clear that wasn't going to happen. Nevertheless, they tried to end many of the excesses of the Renaissance Church and the Renaissance popes. Much reformed discipline and administration, and founding of new orders, such as the Jesuits, and reform of orders. So I found some interesting art of Trent, and that's what I'd like to end with. Like, what did the Council of Trent look like? And how should we envision it? And what could we say about it? We don't know the artist who did this. You often see this painting as the painting of the Council of Trent. Well, I'm not sure because I'll show you some alternatives. But what it does say is the council, as a huge meeting, was held in the huge cathedral in the city of Trento. And you see how it's up here would be the front of the church, the main altar. And you see that the bishops are surrounded, are in an arc type situation. And here you see some cardinals up here and so on. Generally, that's historical in the sense that the council was held in the huge basilica type church in Trent. What this painting reflects is probably a lot more people than were at most of the sessions. Let's look at some other art. This one's really fun because this one is in Rome. And this one says, there was a lot of action going on outside of it too. It shows the same general setup, which probably confirms that it was relatively historical, that they were in the cathedral and, as we might say, using the cathedral sideways in order to fit everyone in. Notice the women out here though, and look at this woman right here. She's not the Pope. She is the Church Triumphant. So she is reflecting the spirit that the spirit of Trent, that the church would be so reformed, the church would be so genuine, that the church was indeed the church ultimately triumphant. Now this one's probably also somewhat realistic, and this does not use the Cathedral of Trent sideways though. It places and they may have used it differently in different sessions. But here we see the main altar, and here we see the gathered participants at the meetings. So it's in the third session that they talk about art. And not because it wasn't important, but that's when they finally did it. They were, as I already said, they were reacting to iconoclasm, and they were reacting to mannerism, which was pretty flamboyant in some ways. They were reacting to that too. They thought that religious art had lost its focus on religious subject matter, and that it had too many flourishes, too much decoration, exaggeration, so a la the style of mannerism. And they thought that the works of Leonardo, get this, Leonardo, Raphael, and early Michelangelo, like the Last Judgment, they thought that these had too many flourishes, and that there were other things that were objective. For example, that some physical characteristics were so exaggerated that the people in paintings looked asymmetrical or even unrealistically elegant. And they even criticized Michelangelo's Last Judgment, which I think is probably, I didn't put a slide in of that. I think you probably know that painting on the wall of the Sistine Chapel. And therefore, the nude figures in the Last Judgment were covered up, were painted over. So the church was putting pressure on artists for more restraint, and the council decreed this. Art should provide an accurate portrayal of the biblical narrative or a saint's life, avoid imaginary data, and encourage piety. Whoa, that sounds like Zurbaran, doesn't it? Art was to be direct and compelling. Zurbaran, for sure. They said that veneration should be paid to the person, not the image. Every superstition shall be removed, all lasciviousness be avoided, and so on. Look down at the next to the last line. No one be allowed to place or cause to be placed any unusual image in any place or church, howsoever exempted, except that image have been approved by the bishop. So you can see they're really pulling in. They're really trying to get hold of the situation that had needed reform. Yeah, one more or a couple more. This is a 16th century Council of Trent. We know this painting, but it's in a private collection in New York. Again, probably shows the similar layout. You see, this would look like a lot of people had attended in the 17th century. Look at this painting. This is a modern council. This is Vatican II, 1962 to 1965. This is what an opening session of it looked like, over 2,000 people. We could have a whole talk about this too, because there's a lot of problems here. One of the biggest problems is, with a few exceptions up here in the loges, there are no women in this picture, which is a big problem right up until today. But anyway, you see that this tradition of councils and holding them inside huge basilicas continues. Here are the last ones. This is so interesting. These are 18th century Hungarian paintings of the Council of Trent that are on the ceiling of the Library of Eger, the Diocese of Eger, Hungary. And there's Trent. And here's looking at a different, here's looking at a different angle of the same thing. So the whole ceiling is Trent. Now that in symbolic form right there states what happened. Trent dominates the church from Trent forward until here. This is really extraordinary. It's the art says it. If you were in this library in Hungary, it's a diocesan library. Right there over your head are the reminders of what Trent said, what it mandated. Trent, in many ways, has gotten a bad name, but as the historians of Trent will point out, it was a very serious attempt at serious reform and serious updating. And yeah, we'll go down in history probably more as a totally sincere attempt to overcome what the Reformation had uncovered. Well, I have to stop here. If you have any final questions, be happy to take questions or comments or whatever. Who's out there, please?
Maria says, thank you for the lecture. I believe she has left.
Oh, okay, that's fine. You can unmute everybody. Renata.
Yes. I don't have an unmute all, but if you would like to unmute, you can unmute yourselves and participate.
I just want to say thank you. This was really, as always, really interesting. It gave me great stuff to talk about when when I'm talking to people in the museum. Thank you, Florence.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Well, I would say thank you for showing me that there was a whole lot of activity going on other than science, because I've lived all my life in science, had no idea that all this was taking place, fashioning all of our thoughts today. And thank you for introducing me.
Oh, yes, of course. Well, thanks for tuning in.
Andrea says, thank you so much for such an interesting and informative talk, as well as Larissa. She says, thank you very much.
Oh, good.
if we have no more questions, I want to say thank you all. Thank you so much, Dr. Gilman, for such a
Yes.
fascinating
Okay.
and engaging tour.
Good.
And Vera also says thank you very much for a historical background. And before you go, I would like to remind you all that this tour and other tours put on previously through the Timken Museum can be found on our social media channel of Facebook. If you would like to find further information on any future tours being put on by the Timken Museum, please check out our website event calendars for those details. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Okay. Bye, everybody.